Hi, I'm Tiffanie and I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Naluri. Prior to this, I spent some time in management consulting and academia where I also completed my PhD in cognitive, perceptual, and brain sciences. So as a cognitive psychologist, I was very fascinated with how social factors influence the way that we perceived our environment and also those around us. I looked at things like first impressions and how that translates into the relationships that we form with other people. Now, 10 years on and after multiple career changes, I find myself almost right back where I started, but now focusing a lot more on mental health both at work and also at the workplace. So in conjunction with World Mental Health Month, especially during this unprecedented time and the constant adjustment and then readjustment to this new normal, I'm here to share a couple of tips on how we can reach out to those around us who might be struggling with their mental health. But before we get into that, let's first talk about the different situations or scenarios that warrant these type of conversation around mental health. Our mental health influences how we think, feel, and behave in our daily lives. It also affects our ability to cope with stress, build relationships, and recover from setbacks and failures. And because of that, unsurprisingly, mental health conditions can come up in various different forms. And it's not just psychiatric symptoms like delusions or extreme mood swings, it can also manifest in daily scenarios such as changes in personal hygiene routine, sleeping patterns, punctuality at work, or a general loss of interest in hobbies. What I've just mentioned are just some of the many other examples of subtle warning signs to look out for in our daily interaction with others. But hopefully this highlights the need for us to be so much more sensitive now more than ever to pick up on some of these less obvious changes that others may be experiencing. So let's play out this scenario where you have indeed observed some of these warning signs in a friend, a family member, or a fellow colleague. So what next? How exactly do you go about starting a conversation with them about their mental health? So for this, we've come up with the simple acronym ACT to serve as a way to remember a broad framework where A stands for ask if you're okay, C stands for console, and T stands for take action. Now, the first step to asking someone if they're okay is to ask ourselves if we are okay. Because before we can look out for others, we need to look out for ourselves. And as a simple guide, there are two questions that we need to ask ourselves. Number one, am I ready? And this includes checking in with your own feelings and whether or not you are truly in a good headspace to speak to someone else. Next, we also need to consider whether or not we are prepared, and this includes whether or not we are prepared for the answer to our question to be, no, I am not okay. Or even perhaps the fact that the person that you have reached out to may completely reject you, either because they are not ready, or maybe they just couldn't bring themselves to talk to you about it at that given moment. So it is important for us to understand that asking someone whether or not they're okay, it's not so much about hearing what their problems are and then trying to resolve it. It's simply about supporting those around us who may be in need of some of these meaningful conversations around some of the warning signs that you may have observed. So an essential component into having some of these meaningful conversations or empowering others to open up is trust. And trust is not built by just what we say, but also how we say it and when we say it. And this is why you need to pick your moment, which also includes careful consideration of your setting. Were you able to find a place that is reasonably quiet and private? You are able to provide your undivided physical and psychological attention for at least the next 15 to 30 minutes. So, okay, you have your settings checked, you have ensured that you have allocated enough time, and you actually get down to asking that loaded question, are you okay? Now, when you do that, it is helpful for you to be very specific about your concerns or some of your observations. So for example, it can be something like, I noticed that you have recently been more than 5 minutes late to our daily check-ins. Is everything okay? So you're presenting it as facts versus making assumptions like, did something happen at home causing you to be late for our meetings? Now, in the second example, you are making an assumption about a person's personal circumstances, and that is not to be confused with what is actually factual. So now, moving on then to the second part, which is on consoling others. So most of us, including you and I, I'm sure, we need to feel that we will be heard without judgment before we are willing to open up. And once a person is willing to open up, active listening is truly the most effective way to help someone who may be in distress. And one important component is the ability to tolerate awkward silences. Because when it comes to people sharing about personal vulnerabilities, and oftentimes when we feel overwhelmed, words just escape us. It is quite hard to string together a coherent sentence that accurately or sufficiently reflect how we are feeling in the heat of the moment. So it is important here then to try to refrain from jumping in to try to finish a person's sentence or to make certain assumptions. Because in this case, silence is not a bad thing at all. It shows that the person that you're speaking to is actively thinking, maybe considering what to share, how much to share, or whether or not this is truly the best time for them to start sharing. Because remember, you have picked the right moment to reach out, but you may or may not have caught them at the best of times. So now, assuming the person that you reached out to started to open up, that's great, because that's also when we are starting to make progress. So here, it's important to remember then that people experiencing distressing emotions and thoughts want to be heard before being offered options or helpful resources. And this is where active listening comes in. So the two skills that I would like to share with you today is number one, providing affirmation. And this can be done through simple words like, oh, I see, or just nodding along so as to show that the person that you're speaking to has your full attention. The second key skill involves paraphrasing. And paraphrasing is using another person's kind of words or even other words altogether to reflect whatever that you have just heard. So paraphrasing shows not only that you're listening, but also that you're attempting to understand. And it is so often the case that we almost hear what we expect to hear due to pre-existing assumptions or stigma. So when paraphrasing, do pay extra attention to not introduce your own ideas or to ask leading questions. Your responses need to remain completely non-judgmental. Because I guess the beauty about life experiences is that they shape how we see things. And this is why two people looking at the exact same thing can come up with two very different sets of observations. So for us to be truly there for someone that we care about, we need to understand that our experiences or perceptions is unlikely to be the same as theirs. And so solutions that have worked for us may not necessarily be what's best for them. So finally, on taking action, The most effective type of action often requires very careful consideration of the situation and also of individual readiness. And sometimes just having a listening ear can make all the difference. But otherwise, you may also want to encourage them to consider self-help techniques. And while it's tempting, instead of suggesting self-help techniques that works for you, what could be better would be to help jog their memory of what has worked for them in the past. So for example, you could ask something like, what have you done in the past to manage similar situations? Or what's something enjoyable or relaxing that you wish you could or would like to do for yourself right now? And after the conversation has ended, maybe a week later, maybe a few days later, it is always good to check in. So you can check in to ask, how has everything been going? Did similar issues occur? And if you do indeed find that the same issues or the same problems are persisting, or maybe it has even worsened, then this is then a very good time for you to encourage them to seek help from a mental health professional. But do bear in mind that it takes people time to accumulate enough courage to reach out for professional help. So please do not confuse resistance or a lack of progress with losing hope. A general guideline in terms of when to escalate to a professional can be determined based on the duration that they may have been experiencing some of the symptoms that we spoke about earlier. And if you notice that it is something that has persisted for more than 2 weeks, then it's usually a good cue to escalate to a mental health professional. Now, I know firsthand that it can be very intimidating to book a 1-hour-long consultation session with a professional. So that is truly one of the gaps that I personally hope to close within Naluri, which is to offer options for people to just have a quick WhatsApp-like chat with any of our mental health professionals through our app. So with that, hopefully you guys found this ACT framework useful in guiding meaningful conversations about mental health with others. And remember, sometimes it really just takes that one conversation that could make all the difference. So do check in with a family member, a friend, or a fellow colleague that you haven't caught up with in a while. Thank you so much for your time today.